Who was Frank Lloyd Wright?
Frank Lloyd Wright, 1867 to 1959, was a famous American architect whose decorative aesthetic continues to be immensely popular and well respected today. Wright's career began in Chicago, Illinois, where he worked first for Joseph Lyman Silsby and later Adler and Sullivan. Louis Sullivan was one of Wright's greatest inspirations. Wright is most closely associated with domestic architecture, known as his prairie school houses. Wright's designs for houses, such as Roby House, 1907 to 1909, in Chicago, are characterized by long horizontal forms, open floor plans, overhanging eaves, use of natural materials, and integration with the flat landscapes of the Midwest. Like other architects working in the early 20th century, Wright was interested in developing a unified architecture, but he also believed in what he called organic architecture. For Wright, this meant that he was concerned with designing a structure, as well as designing its interior, furniture, and landscape to create an integrated whole. Some of Wright's most famous projects include Falling Water, built into the rocky landscape of Mill Run, Pennsylvania, in 1935, and the curving Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, which opened just after Wright's death in 1959.
What is the significance of the Aztec Eagle Man?
The Eagle Man, c. 1440 to 1469, is a 67-inch high fired clay sculpture depicting a youthful man wearing an eagle-shaped helmet and long, winged sleeves. The upper portion of the sculpture is well rendered, but overall, the body is simplistic, and it was possibly dressed in military garments. The sculpture perhaps depicts an Aztec warrior. Aztec warriors were known for their fearlessness and ferocity.
What is picturesque?
Though the literal meaning of picturesque is like a picture, the term refers to the aesthetically pleasing qualities of a painting that come from texture, lighting, composition, and engaging formal irregularities. During the 18th century, British painters found the 17th century landscapes of artists such as Nicolas Poussin and Jacob van Ruysdael to exemplify the picturesque due to their subtlety and mystery. So inspired, British architects even designed gardens after landscape paintings. And during the 19th century, Britain saw a surge in domestic tourism to such picturesque locations as the Lake District and the Scottish Highlands, which were made popular by Romantic poets such as William Wordsworth and Sir Walter Scott.
What is Roman illusionism?
The ancient Romans were known for their beautiful paintings, which they used to decorate the interiors of domestic residences. These paintings often created the illusion of space, much like a theater backdrop, and featured elements such as faux architectural motifs and outdoor scenes. The Villa of P. Fannius. Sinister in Italy has some of the most important surviving wall paintings from the Roman world. The villa was buried by volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 BCE. Nearby Pompeii was also destroyed, and was excavated in the early 20th century. Many of the paintings here feature objects painted using the trompe-l'oeil technique, which means trick of the eye. For example, an image of a glass vase in the painting looks so real that it appears to exist in three-dimensional space. These illusionistic wall paintings were a status symbol for the wealthy Romans who filled their villas with them.
What is muralismo?
Muralismo, or Mexican muralism, is an art movement that developed in the 1920s. Muralismo was characterized by socially aware, nationalistic murals that glorified Mexican history and cultural traditions after a period of political upheaval following the overthrow of the Mexican dictator, General Porfirio Diaz. Three key figures of the movement were Diego Rivera, 1886 to 1957, José Clement Orozco, 1883 to 1949, and David Alfaro Siqueiros, 1896 to 1974. Murals were commissioned by the new government for public spaces such as schools, churches, and government buildings as a celebration of Mexican nationalism and with the idea that art should be accessible to all.
What were Haida totem poles?
The Haida people lived along the Pacific coast in an area that stretched from California to Alaska. The Haida had rich traditions of weaving, carving, and sculpting, and their totem poles, which served as important representations of social status, are examples of monumental sculptures usually carved from cedar trees, a significant art form for at least 300 years. Totem poles depict images of animals or other natural object that serve as a spiritual emblem. Haida totems depict details of family lineage and social status, and were valuable enough to occasionally lead to warfare as clans disputed rightful ownership of totemic images. Haida totem poles could be placed either inside or outside, and could be as much as 60 feet tall. Outside, totem poles could be freestanding and painted, and were used to guide canoes to shore. Totem poles were also used as structural support inside houses, while shorter poles were used for burials.
What is the Venus of Willendorf?
Also referred to as simply the Woman of Willendorf, this prehistoric Venus is a small sculpture. An example of mobiliary art, discovered in Willendorf, Austria, and was made in approximately 22,000 B. CE, found in 1908, its given name is ironic. Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, is usually depicted as thin, graceful, and lovely. The Venus of Willendorf, by contrast, is short, less than 5 inches high, and obese. She has no discernible face, only what seems to be a pattern of braided hair. Her sexuality and fertility is emphasized through an exaggeration of her female features, while other figurative elements have been minimized. Her arms are very small and her legs taper dramatically. The work's small size and defined features suggest it was designed to be held and touched. Debate continues as to whether the sculpture depicts a real person or is a symbol for fertility and health. It would seemingly be difficult to achieve such a body type during the lean years of the Ice Age. The Venus of Willendorf's obesity, while playfully mocked in the early 20th century by those who discovered her, was likely highly valued as an omen of prehistoric health and survival at the time of its creation. Hundreds of similar sculptures have been found.
Who were some of the major portrait painters of the 18th century?
Rosalba Carriera, 1675 to 1757. A leading portrait painter in Venice, known for her early miniatures and use of pastels. During a trip to Paris, she made a pastel portrait of King Louis XV. She was accepted to the Academy of St. Luke in Rome, as well as the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. François Boucher, 1703 to 1770, French Rococo painter whose fashionable paintings of mythological and amorous scenes exhibited graceful style and shimmering colors. He was known for his stylish portraits of wealthy clients, including Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of King Louis XV. Joshua Reynolds, 1723 to 1792, English painter who studied in Rome and is known for his neoclassical style and monumental full-size portraits that effectively capture the essence of the sitter. Extremely well regarded, Reynolds was sophisticated in his approach to art theory. Thomas Gainsborough, 1727 to 1788, highly honored, English portrait painter who also painted landscapes. A rival of Reynolds, his work is infused with elegance and elements of nature. His work is sometimes considered to exhibit romantic tendencies. His delicate brushwork is evident in his portrait of Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan. 1785, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, 1755 to 1842, perhaps the most important female painter in the 18th century. She painted many portraits of Marie Antoinette and the French royal family while working in the Palace of Versailles. Her work strongly reflects the Rococo aesthetic. John Singleton Copley, 1738 to 1815, a resident of the colonial city of Boston and of Irish descent. He painted portraits of famous early Americans, including Paul Revere and Samuel Adams. Though in 1774 he expatriated to England at the behest of Joshua Reynolds and fellow expatriate artist Benjamin West. Gilbert Stuart. 1755 to 1828, leading American portrait painter, still famous for his portrait of George Washington. He also completed portraits of other significant American leaders such as Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe. His style greatly influenced other American painters of the day.
Who was Rachel Royce?
Rachel Royce, 1664 to 1750. Was one of three prominent women artists working in Netherlands in the 17th century. The others were Maria van Oosterwijk, known for her still lives, and Judith Leyster, who painted genre scenes and portraits. Rachel Royce specialized in flower still lives, which were enormously popular during the so-called Dutch Golden Age. One of Royce's still lives was even given as a gift to the visiting Queen of France, Marie de Medici. Flowers were popular subjects for still lives because of their metaphorical associations with the fragility and impermanence of life, lending these paintings moralizing meanings.
How did photography influence Impressionist painting?
With the development of photography, 19th century painters were challenged with setting themselves apart from the new medium. Realists had tasked themselves with accurately representing the visual world. But now a photographer could do this with the flash of a bulb.
What is the significance of the recumbent Buddha?
The Buddha is occasionally depicted reclining on his side with an arm tucked under his ear, while the other arm stretches the length of his body. This body positions indicates the parinirvana, or death of the Buddha. In the Southeast Asian tradition, also popular in China and Japan. In Sri Lanka, a 46-foot-long sculpture of the recumbent Buddha was carved from a single massive rock at a temple site known as Galvihara. Made sometime between the 11th and 12th centuries, this monumental representation of the Buddha's parinirvana shows the holy man surrounded by a smaller-scale mourner, likely his cousin, Ananda. A small pillow, carved from stone, supports the Buddha's head. His face is round, and his thin robes appear to cling to his body in the traditional iconographic manner.
Who was Francis Bacon?
Francis Bacon, 1909 to 1992, was a British painter whose expressive, figurative works often depict scenes of psychological horror. Bacon is often categorized as an existentialist artist. His paintings of Pope Innocent X were modeled after a portrait done by Velázquez in the 16th century. However, Bacon's Pope sits within the confines of a cage-like throne. His face smeared with aggressive streaks of paint against a menacingly black background. Bacon's paintings depict intense scenes of anguish. The artist himself said, "I hope to make the best human cry in painting. To remake the violence of reality itself," as quoted in Stockstad 1128.
Who was Behzad?
Kamal al-Din Behzad, referred to simply as Behzad, was one of the most famous Persian manuscript painters during the 15th century. He was born around 1450 in the city of Herat, in modern-day Afghanistan. He worked for royal courts under both Timurid and Safavid rule. The Timurid rulers descended from Genghis Khan, and were succeeded by the Safavids as rulers of Iran. Behzad's paintings are characterized by vivid color, dynamic detail, and warping perspective. His work notably includes representations of figures, something more common in Persian and Indian painting than other Islamic art. One of Behzad's most famous miniature paintings is Seduction of Yusuf, c. 1488, a story included in both the Bible and the Quran. In the story, Yusuf, Joseph, is seduced by Zulaykha, the wife of Potiphar. According to the Persian version of the tale, Zulaykha led Yusuf through 7 rooms of her palace, locking the door of each room behind her. In the final room, she propositioned Yusuf, but he was able to escape when the doors were miraculously unlocked. In the painting, zigzagging beige panels contain the actual Arabic text of the story at the top, bottom, and in the middle of the manuscript page. Zulaykha's palace is made up of intricately decorated, multicolored panels connected by angled, polygonal staircases. This geometric, two-dimensional painting gives the illusion of three-dimensional space and is a masterpiece of Persian manuscript painting.
What is Artei Povera?
Artei povera, meaning poor art or impoverished art, is a movement that emphasized the use of everyday objects and aims to broaden just what can be considered art. The term was invented by Italian artist German Celant in 1967 and is related to similar movements such as art informal. Artists associated with Artei povera include Greek artist Janis Kounellis, 1933, as well as Italians Giulio Paolini, 1940, and Michelangelo Pistoletto, 1933. Pistoletto is famous for his Artei povera work, Venus of the Rags, 1967. in which a glimmering sculpture of Venus, the goddess of love, with her back turned to the viewer, is juxtaposed with a large, colorful pile of rags. Countess also contrasts refined classicism with the everyday in his Untitled from 1978, in which fragments of a classical sculpture are held together with cord.
What is vorticism?
Vorticism was a brief but powerful artistic and literary movement that developed in England before World War I. In 1914, the editor of a magazine called Blast, Wyndham Lewis, founded vorticism, but its name was coined by the American expatriate poet, Ezra Pound. Lewis explained the movement when he wrote, "At the heart of a whirlpool is a great silent place where all the energy is concentrated. And there, at the point of concentration, is the vorticist," quoted in Dempsey 111. The goal was to create a uniquely British response to Cubism, Futurism, and Expressionism, and make energetic art that reflected the jarring realities of modern life in the early 20th century. Visual art representative of vorticism includes Lewis' composition, 1913. A dynamic rectilinear abstraction, and a vortographic photo image of Ezra Pound by Alvin Langdon Coburn in 1917. The vortiscope was a process invented by Coburn, who attached a series of mirrors to a camera lens to create pictures with multiple layers.
What is the archaic smile?
Take a good look at an archaic kouros or kora sculpture and you may notice a subtle, yet light-hearted smile playing on its lips. The close-lipped archaic smile gives cold stone sculptures a sense of warmth and life. Over 6 feet tall, the Berlin Kora, 570 to 560 BCE, has remnants of red paint and depicts a poised, column-like woman. Her robes fall rigidly and the folds in the fabric look almost like the fluting of a Doric column. She also holds a pomegranate, which therefore links her to the mythological deity Persephone, who was abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld as his wife. Contrasting the otherwise stoic austerity of the work, the Berlin Kora features a warm archaic smile, which brings her to life.
Why did Jasper Johns paint the American flag?
Jasper Johns, 1930, is an American contemporary artist known for his painting, printing, and sculpture. His paintings frequently feature familiar objects and symbols such as targets, numbers, and the American flag. In line with the themes and goals of pop art, Johns was interested in using familiar objects in a new way. Rather than create new images, he wanted to depict things the mind already knows. as quoted in the Met Museum timeline of art history. He said that his decision to paint flags was inspired by a dream, and his realistic works serve to highlight the artificiality of the symbols he represents.
What is the difference between oil paint and tempera paint?
Oil paints are made by mixing pigment into oil, often linseed or another vegetable-based oil. Oil paints create beautiful rich colors that can be easily blended because oil paints dry very slowly. During the late Renaissance, oil painting techniques were developed in the Netherlands, and interest in oil painting spread slowly throughout the rest of Europe. In Renaissance Italy, especially Tuscany, tempera paints were preferred over oil and had been in use long before oil paints. Tempera paint is made by mixing pigment with egg yolk. It dries much more slowly than oil paint. Like oil paints, tempera paints create lovely rich colors.
What is performance art?
Performance art combines theater, music, video, and visual arts, and often features artists actively participating in their own work. Though performance-based ritual art has existed for thousands of years around the world, contemporary performance art developed as part of the early 20th century futurist and surrealist movements. Notable performance artists include Joseph Beuys and Bruce Nauman. For more information about contemporary performance art, see the chapter on Contemporary Art 1960s to present.
Why did Alexander Calder make mobiles?
American artist Alexander Calder, 1898 to 1976, was interested in sculpture that moved, also known as kinetic sculpture. Trained as an engineer and an artist, Calder was intrigued by Piet Mondrian's experimentations of color and form, and himself created moving Mondrian's free hanging mobile sculptures engaged in constant physical change. Not only do Calder's works of art move, but the viewer may move around the art, allowing for ever-changing dynamic viewpoints. Calder's mobile one of those. 1972, is composed of abstract biomorphic forms that suggest organic, lively objects. Calder made more than mobiles. Other sculptural works include the 50-ton arched steel flamingo in Chicago, 1973, and the curving, fin-studded whale 2, constructed of wood and steel in 1964 after the 1937 original, housed at the Museum of Modern Art in New York.
What is brutalism?
The term brutalism was coined in 1954 and refers to a style of modern architecture developed by Le Corbusier, who promoted the use of rough concrete and favored heavy forms. Reinforced concrete can take on sculptural qualities, as in Le Corbusier's design for Notre Dame du Haut. 1950 to 1954, with its flowing roofline and round, asymmetrical tower. Brutalism was most popular during the 1960s and 1970s and coincided with the concept of art brut developed by artist Jean Dubuffet.
What is neoclassical art?
Sometimes it feels like classical influence never goes away, but in the 18th century, a fully formed classical revival evolved on the heels of the Baroque period. During the 18th century, artists and aristocrats flocked to Rome to see the formidable Roman ruins and the art of the Renaissance. Also at this time, new archaeological discoveries were being made in Greece, revealing more about ancient Greek society and art, and fueling increased interest in classical ideas and aesthetics. The neoclassical style contrasted quite sharply with the flamboyant styles of Rococo, and instead emphasized grand simplicity and stability as well as the noble, heroic ideal. Renewed interest in classical thought inspired more than art and architecture. It also fueled political shifts and philosophical ideas that resulted in dramatic societal changes, such as the French and American revolutions and the rise of Napoleon.
Who is Amitabha Buddha?
Amitabha Buddha was a mortal king who reached an enlightened state and became a Buddha. In the tradition of Pure Land Buddhism, the most popular form of Buddhism in China, known as the Buddha of infinite life and infinite light as well as Buddha of the West. Amitabha Buddha promises rebirth in paradise, or Western Pure Land, for those with faith.
What is the High Renaissance?
The High Renaissance is a name given to the late 15th and early 16th centuries, during which time great masters such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael were active, along with slightly later northern Italian artists such as Titian, Correggio, and Giorgione. The High Renaissance is widely considered one of the greatest periods in the history of art, and is certainly the most famous period of Italian art. The High Renaissance is not only an Italian phenomenon. Great masters from Northern Europe include Albrecht Dürer and Hans Holbein, among others. Besides art, great scientific discoveries were also made during the High Renaissance, including the revolutionary work of Galileo and Johannes Kepler. The High Renaissance was a unique and important period of intellectual, technological, and artistic achievement in European history.
What was the Indus Valley Civilization?
The Indus Valley Civilization, c. 2600 to 1900 BCE, was one of the earliest civilizations in South Asia and was established in present-day Pakistan and northwest India. It is sometimes referred to as the Harappa civilization. Major urban areas of the Indus Valley include Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Shanhudaro, which form a cohesive group due to their architectural similarities. Not much is known about Indus Valley culture or religion, but the discovery of art artifacts, including ancient seals, greatly interests art historians and other scholars who are eager to make cultural connections between the Indus Valley and contemporary art and culture in India and Southeast Asia.
What are characteristics of Yuan painting?
The Yuan dynasty began with the rule of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, who ruled until 1294. Mongolian power remained in China until 1368 and the effect of Mongolian culture on Chinese art continues to be debated. Yuan painters preferred to work on paper rather than silk, and their style is characterized by solid, hard-edged forms.
What is humanism?
Though the term humanism wasn't invented until the 19th century, it refers to the rejection of medieval scholastic values and the new embrace of classical thought during the Renaissance. Humanism is also a way of thinking. An important part of humanist philosophy was education that focused on studying history, and emphasized personal ethics and civic values. Renaissance humanism resulted in a new emphasis on individuality. During the medieval period, art and literature tended to be viewed through a divine lens, from the perspective of God. During the Renaissance, by contrast, artists tended to take on a more human-centered view of the world.
What is the Silla crown?
Though influenced by the art and culture of China, Korean art is distinct and has a long history. Around 100 BCE, a kingdom known as the Silla Kingdom took control over most of the Korean peninsula. The Silla crown is a gold and jade headpiece likely made somewhere between the 5th and 6th centuries CE, made from sheets of gold and adorned with jewels and spangles. The upright styling of the crown has been linked to either trees or antlers, which symbolize life and supernatural power. It is possible that this crown was either ceremonial, or never meant to be worn at all.
What is sound art?
Also known as audio art, sound art developed in the late 1970s. Though artists and musicians had been experimenting with sound and electronic music for decades prior. Sound art, like video art, is a medium rather than a style, and features many different types of sounds from natural to man-made. The Italian artist Luigi Russolo, 1883 to 1947, wrote a manifesto titled The Art of Noises in 1913. Using new musical instruments as well as music comprised of noise sounds. Also in 1913, Dada artist Marcel Duchamp created the Iratum musical, and later Yves Klein wrote the Monotone Symphony, 1947, which was composed of only one note. There are a number of sound artists, and visual artists who incorporate sound, working today. Including the British artist Brian Eno, 1948, who collaborated with the artist Peter Schmidt to create an artwork called Oblique Strategies, Over 100 Worthwhile Dilemmas, 1975. Oblique Strategies is a set of cards designed to assist in solving difficult dilemmas that arise during life and creative work, such as writing a musical composition. Sound art is still in its infancy, and new audio and digital technology continues to develop and impact the medium.
What is art?
Since this is a book about the history of art, one might assume a definition of art itself would be straightforward. It is not. In a way, art is whatever a society identifies as such, a status often given to finely crafted works of beauty, works of religious and historic significance, and even theoretical significance. Works of art can include paintings, drawings, sculpture, and architecture, but can also include furniture, textiles, dance, performance, video, and installation pieces, among other forms. The definition of art can change quite dramatically over time, from culture to culture, and even between individuals. A painted Greek vase, for example, was not considered valuable art by ancient Greek society. Today, however, ancient Greek pottery can fetch millions of dollars. And prized examples are housed in top museums around the world. Two friends might visit a contemporary art gallery and completely disagree about the art contained within. The artist Marcel Duchamp shocked the art world when he submitted a porcelain urinal to an exhibition by the Society of Independent Artists in 1917. While the work, titled Fountain, was rejected, it is considered to be a masterpiece of the avant-garde movement, and represents a monumental shift in thinking about art in the 20th century.
Who was Raphael?
Raphael, 1438 to 1520. Was 31 years younger than Leonardo da Vinci and 8 years younger than Michelangelo. Very aware of their status and their skill. Raphael made his own place in this pantheon of high Renaissance artists. Whereas Michelangelo was moody and difficult to work with, Raphael was friendly, personable, and well organized. His paintings are characterized by a sweetness and harmony that has been frequently imitated, but rarely, if ever, equaled. Raphael studied in Perugia and had a successful career first in Florence, and then later in Rome, where he was commissioned by Pope Julius II to decorate the Vatican apartments. His most famous works include his Vatican fresco, The School of Athens, 1510 to 1511, and his paintings of the Virgin and Child such as Madonna of the Meadow, which also includes an image of the infant Saint John the Baptist. He painted one major mythological scene, Galatea, in 1512, as well as an influential portrait of Pope Julius II the same year. After the death of Bramante, he was called on as the architect of St. Peter's, though most of his designs were either never constructed, or were changed. Raphael died at age 37 and was buried in the Pantheon in Rome. Why was St.
What is the difference between Christian and Islamic architecture?
When looking at examples of Christian and Islamic religious architecture, one might be surprised that there are often many similarities. Both churches and mosques often feature central domes, and some early mosques, like the Dome of the Rock, resemble centrally planned churches in their use of the ambulatory, while the nave of a basilica plan church is often filled with pews. Mosques have open floor plans, which allows Muslims to kneel and pray using prayer rugs. The exterior of a mosque is notable for its tall minarets, which are not used in church architecture, though both styles emphasize monumental height and grandeur. In terms of decoration, many, though certainly not all, Christian churches are filled with mosaics, painted narrative scenes, and stained glass windows featuring stories from the Bible. Mosque decoration also features passages from the Quran, however. This is visualized using calligraphy, due to Islam's iconoclastic approach to art. Both early churches and mosques rely heavily on mosaics for decoration.
What is Confucianism?
Confucianism is considered to be both a philosophy and a religion, and is native to China. It is named for Confucius, a scholar born in 551 BCE, whose teachings form the foundation of the philosophy. Confucianism is concerned with the relationship between people in society, including relationships with ancestors and even the emperor. The virtue of human-heartedness, called Ren, is key to being a junzi, or gentleman. During the Han Dynasty, 206 BC-E-220 CE, Confucianism became the official religion of the state and had a major impact on Chinese art and culture.
What is Valdivian sculpture?
The Valdivian culture, c. 3550 to 1600 BCE, was based in southern Ecuador and was older than the first dynasties of Egypt. They are known for making clay figurines, which are some of the earliest representative art produced in the Americas. These figurines were usually quite small, and some pieces are hermaphroditic, displaying both male and female characteristics. Many of these sculptures have been found in domestic settings, which suggest an association with women and fertility.
How did Buddhism influence Japanese art?
Pure Land Buddhism Jodo in Japanese, was the primary form of Buddhism in Japan, as well as China, coming to particular prominence during the Heian period. Jodo remains the most popular type of Buddhism in Japan. The Amitabha Buddha, known in Japan as Amida Buddha, was an important subject in sculpture and painting, as was the concept of paradise. Esoteric Buddhism was also important in Japan, where it was called Mikya. Highly influenced by Hinduism, esoteric Buddhism is hierarchical and features many complex deities. An important visual element of esoteric Buddhism are mandaras, mandalas in Sanskrit. Cosmic diagrams of the universe used in ritual, meditation, and teaching. The Womb World Mandara from the Heian period is one of the oldest and most well-preserved Japanese examples. The work is filled with images of gods and Buddhas, and a central image of Dainichi, the universal Buddha. Some of the gods have multiple heads and limbs, and many hold lightning bolts, which symbolize the power of the mind.
Why does art from the Amarna period look so different from other Egyptian art?
During the New Kingdom, a ruler named Amenophis IV broke away from the traditional religious values of Egypt and focused his worship on a single god, the sun god, Aten. In order to honor Aten, he changed his name to Akhenaten. This pharaoh not only broke away from religious customs, but artistic customs as well. Much of the art made during his reign features the god Aten, depicted as a sun disk with linear rays emanating from it. Each ray has a small hand, often pointing down towards Akhenaten, which represents divine blessing. Images showing Akhenaten, such as a limestone relief featuring the ruler and his wife, Nefertiti, are unusual in that the pharaoh is not traditionally idealized. He looks almost ugly, in fact, with a protruding chin and long, thin body. In the relief, he is shown sitting with Nefertiti, playing with their children. It is a warm, family scene that is quite different from conventional pharaonic works from periods both before and after.
What is the orator?
The orator is a life-size, bronze sculpture of Aulus Metellus, a Roman official from the time of the Roman Republic. Made in either the 1st or 2nd century BCE. The work depicts the authoritative politician addressing a crowd with his right arm raised. Wearing traditional leather boots and a toga, the portrait sculpture is part of a tradition of Roman realism known as verism. Popular during the time of the Democratic Republic. Statues like this would have been placed on the tops of columns as a form of memorial, where it would appear as if the figure was addressing the people below.
Who was Thomas Cole?
Thomas Cole, 1801 to 1848, was an American painter who emigrated from England and was celebrated for his early portraits and later landscapes. His work helped to establish an American landscape tradition known as the Hudson River School. One of Cole's most recognizable paintings is the Oxbow, 1836, which depicts a dramatic view of the Connecticut River from the top of Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts, either just before or just after a storm. Although the painting represents an actual location, Cole manipulated the landscape to add drama to the scene. He was known to sketch a landscape and then not paint the scenes for months so as to free himself from the constraints of realism.
What is the lightning field?
The lightning field, 1977, is an example of an earthwork, or land art, created by American sculptor Walter de Maria in western New Mexico. Built in the vast desert, de Maria installed 400 stainless steel poles with pointed tips in a grid-like pattern that reaches 1 mile by 1 kilometer in area. Each pole, at around 20 feet tall, is designed to attract lightning, as well as attract visitors. The lightning field can also be considered a sculpture or an installation, and it was designed to encourage visitors to walk amongst the poles and engage with the natural environment. This massively scaled example of land art can be visited by contacting the DIA Foundation, which manages the site.
What is suprematism?
Suprematism developed between 1913 and 1915 by Russian artist Casimir Malevich 204, 1878 to 1935, was concerned with pure aesthetics and therefore promoted total abstraction and freedom from realism, politics, and the past. Suprematist paintings often depict geometric abstractions. Malevich was interested in the square as a pure form, and much of his work focuses on rectangular composition, such as Black Square, 1915, and suprematist composition, White on White, 1918. Other paintings, such as suprematist composition conveying the feeling of a mystic wave from outer space. 1917, were visual attempts to communicate with the subconscious. Other artists associated with suprematism were Ivan Puni, 1894–1956, and Lyubov Popova, 1889–1924, among others.
What is the Doric order?
The Doric order was the earliest order to develop and did so towards the end of the 7th century B.C.E. It features a baseless column that supports a horizontal entablature. A Doric column is approximately 5 times as tall as it is wide. A ratio of 5:1. The shaft of the column is fluted, which means it is decorated in shallow, vertical grooves. A Doric entablature rests atop the column, and features a decorative band called a frieze, which is decorated with alternating triglyphs and metopes. The Parthenon is an example of a building constructed according to the Doric order. The Parthenon, built of marble, is dedicated to Athena, the patron goddess of the city of Athens. It sits atop the Acropolis, a prominent hill in the center of the city, which also includes other architecturally significant structures. Built under the direction of the famous statesman Pericles in the 4th century BCE. The Parthenon was designed to represent Athens' self-proclaimed status as an enlightened and civilized center of the world, and celebrated the democratic Greeks' recent defeat of the Persian Empire. The exterior of the Parthenon was masterfully decorated with architectural sculpture on all sides, and a 40-foot, gold-covered sculpture of Athena was erected on a pedestal in the center of the temple.
What is cyclitic sculpture?
The cyclitic culture, c. 3000 to 1200 BCE, is known for its ceramic figurines. Cyclitic artisans made their pieces out of various materials, from poor quality clay to marble, and represented humans, animals, and other forms. Some of the most well-known cyclitic sculptures are of women. These pieces can range in size and are highly abstract and stylized. The surfaces are smooth with little carved detail. Facial features and other details would have been painted. In many examples, a figurine's only facial feature is a nose, while arms are crossed over the chest, as if the figure is either asleep or dead. One side of the figure is flat and the toes are pointed, an indication that the piece was meant to lie on its back. In fact, many of these sculptures have been found near graves, raising the possibility that they served a funerary purpose, though their exact function is unknown.
What are the main characteristics of Ottonian architecture?
The Ottonian rulers emphasized their imperial strength and military prowess through the construction of monumental architecture reminiscent of ancient Rome. Churches of the period followed the basilica plan and featured wooden roofs, many of which burned down. The Church of St. Cyriacus in Gernrode, Germany, begun in 961. Is one of the best surviving examples of Ottonian architecture. The church architects placed a newfound focus on verticality, which foreshadowed the leaping heights of much later medieval buildings. The Church of St. Cyriacus features a second-floor gallery, clerestory windows, and a westwork wall along the west end 74 of the nave, one of the key features of Ottonian church architecture.
What is twisted perspective?
Many of the animals depicted in the Lascaux caves, both predators and prey, are shown in profile, which means the viewer is looking at the side of the animal and only one half of the face can be seen. Some animals have been manipulated, however, using a fairly sophisticated technique called twisted perspective. Twisted perspective is created by showing most of the animal's body in profile, but turning a portion of the animal's head so that it seems to point directly at the viewer. This technique adds drama and energy to the image and results in a lifelike depiction of an animal. In one example, an antlered deer is shown mostly in profile, but its antlers appear to swing powerfully towards the viewer.
What is the creation of Adam?
The creation of Adam is the most famous of Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Adam is seen nude, reclining on a patch of bare terrain while God the Father approaches from the air, accompanied by angels and cherubs. God is shown with long, gray hair and a flowing beard, which are blown back by the wind. A red cape swirls around the figures and God's hand reaches out toward Adam with one finger outstretched, delivering the spark of life. Adam seems to move slightly towards God, though his wrist is limp and his head lolls to one side. He is not yet fully alive. Their fingers appear mere centimeters apart, eliciting tension and drama. This is one of the most iconic images in all of art history. Michelangelo has captured the seconds immediately before God awakens Adam to life. The creation of Adam is both delicate and powerful, poised and energized.
What is expressionism?
The term expressionism is commonly used in the arts, but with a capital E. It refers to an art movement that developed in Germany at the start of the 20th century. German expressionism, like Fauvism, was concerned with communicating powerful feelings through color and visual style, and expressionist works often incorporate meaningful symbols. There were two important groups of painters who were part of the Expressionist movement in Germany. The first was called Die Brücke, the bridge. And the second was known as Der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Riders.
What is parietal art?
While mobiliary art is one of the major forms of Paleolithic art, parietal art includes non-portable art such as rock and cave paintings. Truly impressive Paleolithic paintings have been found all over the world, including Europe, Africa, and Australia, in sites that were likely used for religious or spiritual purposes, rather than as shelter. When archaeologists first discovered prehistoric cave art in Europe, they assumed the expressive, realistic images they saw must be a hoax because they didn't. Imagine that people from the Ice Age were capable of such artistic skill. Archaeological evidence, such as the discovery of nearby tools made of bone and stone, convinced them otherwise. One of the most famous examples of Paleolithic cave art is the series of paintings at the Lascaux Caves in France.
Who was Diego Velázquez?
Diego Velázquez, 1599 to 1660, was a leading Spanish painter from Seville, who served as the court painter to King Philip IV. Inspired by the style of Caravaggio, Velázquez's work emphasized naturalism, contrasts of light and dark, and the dignity of everyday people. He painted portraits of King Philip IV and Pope Innocent X, as well as Juan de Pareja, a slave, and Sebastian de Mora, a dwarf and attendant at court. Velázquez was particularly concerned with raising the status of the artist in Spain, and works such as Las Hilanderas, c. 1657, and Las Meninas, 1656, have been associated with this theme.
Who is David Hockney?
David Hockney, 1937, is considered an important early pop artist. Though he dislikes that association, and his work demonstrates a range of styles. A prominent contemporary artist whose career kick-started while he was still a student at the Royal College of Art in London. Hockney's early work frequently incorporated poetic fragments and personal themes. Paintings such as We Two Boys Together Clinging, 1961, are reminiscent of the art brut of Jean Dubuffet with scrawled handwriting and childlike forms. Hockney's mid-career paintings are notably smooth and painted with acrylic, reflecting the artist's skill as a graphic artist as well as a painter. His most famous pop art work is arguably The Big Splash, 1967. A brightly painted scene of a California swimming pool in which a jarring and geometric diving board juts into the center of the scene. A swirled splash breaks the smooth monotony of the pool's blue water, creating a photo-like image. In the 1970s and 80s, he experimented with collage by incorporating Polaroid fragments into highly ordered paintings. His work with photography led to a prestigious award from the Royal Photographic Society in 2003. Hockney continues to paint and receive recognition for his work, including monumental landscapes such as a bigger Grand Canyon. 1998, which is composed of over 60 individual paintings.
Who was Praxiteles?
Praxiteles was a Greek sculptor who worked in Athens during the 4th century BCE and is considered to be one of the most important artists of the classical period. Along with sculptors Scopas and Lysippos, he is particularly well known for the Aphrodite of Cnidos, made for the Greek city of Cnidos around 350 BCE. It is thought to be the first time an artist produced a monumental female sculpture fully nude. It was common to depict the male nude, but the female form was traditionally clothed. The Aphrodite of Cnidos demands to be admired, and from multiple viewpoints. Her flesh is soft and supple and her body is delicately off balance in the contrapposto pose. With this work, Praxiteles set a new standard for depiction of the female nude. The work itself was so beautiful that the real goddess Aphrodite was said to have traveled to Cnidos and upon seeing the statue exclaimed, "Where did Praxiteles see me naked?"
What was the Hudson River School?
The artists of the Hudson River School, such as Thomas Cole, Asher B. Durand, Frederick Edwin Church, and Albert Bierstadt, were American artists interested in establishing an American tradition separate from the influences of European art. The work of this informal group was certainly initially inspired by Romanticism and European landscapes, but demonstrated a certain realism, and was philosophically tied to transcendentalism. As expressed by the American philosophers Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Through open air, or plein air, painting, which required significant hiking and traveling to locations that reached from the Catskills to Niagara Falls to Yosemite Valley. The artists of the Hudson River School depicted an apparent untouched Eden that juxtaposed sweetly pastoral scenes with the power of the American wilderness.
What is the meaning of the persistence of memory?
The Persistence of Memory, 1931, is Salvador Dali's most famous painting. In this work, Dali depicts languid, melting clocks draped over an arid, desert landscape. Unlike many of the other large, abstract works being produced at the time, The Persistence of Memory is quite small, not much bigger than an ordinary piece of paper. It is highly detailed and uncomfortably realistic for such a strange picture. Against a smooth and seemingly infinite horizon, are four liquid clocks. At the center, one of these clocks, really more of a pocket watch, curls over what appears to be a boneless, fish-like face. Another clock oozes off the side of a table-like surface, while another rests upside down, black ants aggressively gathered atop it. Dali himself compared the objects in the painting to melting camembert cheese. And the entire scene is fixed in an impossible state of timeless transformation. Although there can be no definitive definition of this painting, the work is a meditation on the unfixed nature of time and space.